Welcome to the first Inspiring Ecology podcast. My name is Dr. Martin Hughes, an evolutionary ecologist and the founder of Inspiring Ecology. Like many people in my field, I myself was inspired by watching David Attenborough documentaries as a child. I'm absolutely delighted documentary series like Planet Earth and Blue Planet have made a comeback, and I hope it has the same impact on the next generation as it did on me. Inspiring Ecology is a project based on a similar idea. An idea that if we can communicate and connect people with nature through various forms, we can do more to protect it. At Inspiring Ecology, we can do this by visiting schools and teaching students outside in their own local ecosystems. We have provided ecological workshops to teachers, and we publish materials online that can be used in the classroom. In 2018, we aim to expand the project and have a larger online presence through social media and podcasts such as this one. We hope to create a platform for people interested in science to discuss their ideas, implement practical conservation in their local communities, and support schools interested in ecology generally. This podcast will hopefully be the first of many related to ecology and science in 2018. In our first podcast, we will discuss the history and impact of some invasive non-native species in British ecosystems, with particular reference to Scotland. First, it is probably worth defining the term invasive non-native. The term non-native species refers to species introduced, usually by humans, outside of their natural distribution. Some people also refer to these species as alien species. However, we will use the term non-native. An invasive non-native, then, is any non-native animal or plant that has the ability to spread and compete in this new habitat, causing damage to the environment, the economy, our health, and the way we live. In this podcast, we will focus on 4 invasive non-native species in Britain: the North American or Eastern grey squirrel, the American mink, the Japanese Sika deer, and the Eurasian Ruffe. Please note, for the ease of listening and the flow of storytelling, I will refrain from using the Latin scientific names and use the animal's common name instead. You can find the scientific names of all species discussed in the description, with links to some references and additional sources of reading. Let us begin with the grey squirrel. The grey squirrel belongs to the same family that includes other small to medium-sized rodents, such as ground squirrels, chipmunks, flying squirrels, and prairie dogs. The grey squirrel is a tree squirrel with predominantly grey fur with a brownish hue. They often have brown fur on their faces with a white underbelly. They are native to eastern and midwestern United States and the southern provinces of Canada. However, they were introduced to Britain during the Victorian era. During the Victorian era, which occurred between 1837 until 1901, introduction of exotic animals to estates was considered fashionable and was therefore fairly widespread. Little did they know the impact these introductions would have on the environment for generations to come. The first recorded release of grey squirrels took place at Henbury Park in Cheshire, England in 1876. The most significant release, however, occurred 14 years later in 1890 at Woburn Park in Bedfordshire, England. Internal transplantations of the Woburn stock occurred until 1929, despite importation of stocks ending before World War I began in 1914. The grey squirrel spread rapidly across England, Wales and Scotland over the following years. In fact, the area containing grey squirrels in 1930 almost doubled by 1935. Opposition to the grey squirrels grew as their populations did the same. In the early 20th century, grey squirrels were referred to as tree rats and were criticised as being greedy, opportunistic and fecund. These 3 traits undoubtedly contributed to their success in spreading across Britain at the cost of the native red squirrels. Being omnivorous enabled the grey squirrels to access a wider selection of food resources than the native red squirrels, which were much more selective. Red squirrels feed mainly on pine cones and hazelnuts, and additionally grey squirrels can digest acorns better than red squirrels and therefore access an extra source of protein and fat. Thus, they can outcompete red squirrels occupying the same habitat. Furthermore, female greys can reproduce much younger than native red squirrels, Female greys can reproduce from as young as 5.5 months, although most don't until they're at least 1 year old. Conversely, female red squirrels don't reproduce until they're at least 2 years old, and when put under pressure, red squirrels will not breed as often. Although grey squirrels can exploit more food resources and have a higher fecundity than red squirrels, perhaps the deadliest aspect of their introduction to Britain is the transmission of a virus that they're immune to, but the reds are not. The grey squirrels carry the squirrel parapox virus, which causes the fatal disease squirrelpox in red squirrels in Britain. Grey squirrels rarely die from the disease, having developed an immunity over many years. The red squirrels, however, have no immunity, and the mortality rate in untreated individuals is believed to be 100%. The virus can kill the red squirrels within 4 to 5 days after infection, and is believed to be the main source of their dramatic decline in Britain since the introduction of the greys. As recently as 2011, Oxford University's Wildlife Conservation Unit for the People's Trust for Endangered Species suggested red squirrels may go extinct by 2030 as British populations dropped more than 50% in the past 50 years. Grey squirrels are not restricted to just ecological impacts, but they also cause economic impacts. By stripping the bark of some tree species, they leave trees susceptible to fungal infections through the damaged areas. They also degrade the timber value in commercial plantations. In fact, bark stripping damage caused by grey squirrels cost the UK timber industry some £14 million per year. Also, replanting wild trees damaged by the grey squirrels, funded by the government, is now costing British taxpayer money. Methods of control of the grey squirrels, however, has been equally controversial. Most common is the use of traps or shooting greys directly. However, such culls have received strong opposition from animal rights groups. In 2017, it was estimated that only 160,000 red squirrels remained in the UK, 120,000 of which occur in Scotland, which is 75% of the UK population. The Scottish populations, however, appear to be increasing again due to a huge collaboration between various agencies and charities such as the Scottish Wildlife Trust, RSPB Scotland, Scottish Natural Heritage, Forestry Commission Scotland, Scottish Land and Estates, and the Red Squirrel Survival Trust. This success is attributed to the grey squirrel control zone running coast to coast along the Highland boundary fault line, suggesting strategic control zones instead of mass culls may be the most effective way to mitigate the spread of greys and the protection of reds. Next, we will discuss the Japanese Sika deer. Sika deer belong to the same family as elk, fallow deer, caribou, roe deer, and the moose. The Sika deer are one of the few deer species that do not lose their spots upon reaching maturity. Sika deer are similar in size and coat to fallow deer, but darker. They are reddish-brown to yellow-brown in colour, with a dark dorsal stripe surrounded by white spots in the summer. During winter, they are dark grey to black and the spots are faint or absent, and they have a very distinct white gland on the lower back leg. Their tail is shorter and with a less distinct stripe than the fallow deer. Sika deer were introduced from the Far East into Britain in 1860 for aesthetic reasons like the grey squirrel. It is possible that almost all Sika deer living in England, Scotland and some Irish Sika are descendants from one stag and 3 hinds introduced to Viscount Powercourt's Deer Park in Enniskerry in Ireland, County Wicklow, in 1860. Although considered a pest in some areas by causing damage to woodland, similar to the grey squirrel, the biggest threat Sika deer pose is much more cryptic: hybridisation with the native red deer. Hybridisation is most pronounced on the fringes of the populations where both species meet. The genetic integrity of the native red deer population is therefore in question. Hybridisation between red deer and Sika deer is so high in southern Lake District and the Wicklow Mountains that the populations here are believed to be entirely red Sika hybrids. It has been suggested in time that there will be no purebred red deer populations left in Britain, with the exception of some living on Scottish islands. According to Countryfile in 2015, the British deer population is at its highest level for 1,000 years, with an estimated 1.5 million deer in the countryside and urban areas. The extensive browsing of vegetation is believed to cause £4.5 million worth of damage to Scotland alone, and a further £4.3 million worth of damage, according to DEFRA, on cereal crops in east and southwest England. According to Dr. Paul Dolman from the University of East Anglia, deer will eat the understory, and so the coppices, for example, lose their shrub layer. This can be a problem for nightingales and other long-distance migrants, such as willow warblers, chiffchaffs and blackcaps. It has been suggested that there is a 50% decline in woodland bird numbers where deer are present. The reason the number of deer are so high includes protection by the 1963 Deer Act in England and Wales and 1959 in Scotland, which prevents deer from being treated like vermin and outlaws the shooting of them. They enjoy better habitats with farmers growing crops all year round, and crucially, they have no natural predators in the wild, something we will discuss in a later podcast. Control measures for deer generally include culling and fencing of areas. However, culls again have received criticism from animal rights groups, and fencing large areas can be time-consuming and costly. Scottish gamekeepers also oppose any significant increase in culls, as hunting deer contributes £170 million a year to the economy and provides 2,500 full-time jobs. Like the grey squirrel, there is no easy answer for controlling Sika deer, or any deer population for that matter. This moves us on to our third invasive non-native species, the American mink. The American mink is a semi-aquatic animal which belongs to the same family as carnivorous mammals, including weasels, badgers, otters, martens and wolverines. American mink have long bodies which allows them to enter into burrows of prey and is streamlined, reducing water resistance while they swim. They occur naturally across most of North America, from Alaska across Canada and through the United States, with the exception of arid areas such as Arizona. They have been introduced extensively across the world, including Europe, Iceland, the former USSR and South America, not for aesthetic reasons like the grey squirrel or Sika deer, but for their fur. Mink fur was highly sought after in the 1900s and resulted in huge numbers of fur farms being established across the globe. American mink became feral in Britain in the 1950s as a result of escapes from fur farms, and the first breeding population was confirmed in 1956. The governments during the years that followed the first reported population of 1956, 2 Conservative and 1 Labour, were too slow to react, and the problem became bigger. The Treasury reluctantly funded a mink eradication team of 7 people in 1964, and it only lasted until 1970, after it was clearly not having an impact. By 1967, wild mink were present in over half the counties in England and Wales and much of lowland Scotland. A series of attacks on fur farms in the 1990s resulted in the release of thousands of mink into Britain, which was widely condemned at the time by both sides of the anti-fur debate. It is believed, however, by the 1990s mink used in the farms had been bred for their easiness to handle and were relatively well domesticated and therefore easier to catch and less likely to establish wild populations. So we're unsure of how much of an impact those releases had. However, as voracious carnivorous predators, the damage caused by American mink has been extensive. In a fantastic review of the impact of non-native species on UK biodiversity, Sarah Manchester and James Bullock state mink have impacted waterbird species, although the magnitude is unknown, mainly through the destruction of nests and consumption of bird eggs, and are actually attacking the birds themselves, and wild mink are believed to account for the decrease in gull and tern numbers in the west of Scotland. There's also evidence to suggest that the mink have also impacted salmonid numbers by eating salmon and trout eggs in river systems. But perhaps the most publicised impact is the significant inverse correlation between mink and water vole activity. In fact, water voles, which are also small aquatic mammals, are the fastest declining mammal in the UK. Once found in nearly every waterway in England, Scotland and Wales, it is now thought to have been lost in up to 90% of these sites. 40% of the remaining population is believed to be found in Scotland. Although mink are not entirely to blame for the decline in water voles, other threats such as habitat loss and degradation, pollution, and population fragmentation have all contributed. Mink, however, do appear to be the most destructive. For example, a female mink can fit into a vole burrow and wipe out an entire colony and population in a single waterway. That's one mink. The number of mink in some counties is believed to be so large that total eradication of them is unfeasible. However, some success stories do exist. In particular, the Hebridean Mink Project, conducted by Ian MacLeod and his team at Scottish Natural Heritage, SNH. The Hebridean Mink Project was set up in 2001 in a response to the threat of mink on many bird populations nesting in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. The Outer Hebrides is an archipelago made up of a number of islands including North and South Uist, Benbecula, Lewis and Harris and Barra. After £6.4 million over 13 years and more than 2,000 minks being removed, the project has been hailed a success. Although total eradication of mink may never be possible, the project moved into its monitoring phase in 2013 and very few mink have been reported since. As mink numbers decrease, the number of breeding tern numbers has increased throughout the islands. Our final invasive non-native species is quite a localised case study, however extremely important with regards to maintaining local biodiversity. Now we're going to talk about the Eurasian Ruffe. Ruffe, spelled R-U-F-F-E, is a small fish that belongs to the same family as the walleye and the perch. They have similar coloration to the walleye, an olive brown to golden brown colour on its back, paler on the sides with yellowish white undersides, and a large spiny dorsal fin. They are native to the basins of the Caspian, Black, Aral and North Sea, and found in Britain in some areas. They have been introduced to western parts of Europe, such as France and Italy, and also North American Great Lakes. What makes these small fish, they get up to about 25 centimetres, so dangerous is their aggressive nature and ability to reproduce quickly. A single female can produce 130,000 to 200,000 eggs per year. In addition to this, they feed on a variety of resources such as zoobenthos, chironomids, small aquatic bugs, larvae and other fish eggs, the latter of which is particular concern in Loch Lomond, Scotland. Ruffe, which had never been recorded in Scotland before, were first recorded in Loch Lomond in 1982. What was particularly concerning at the time was the impact this introduction would have on one of the rarest fish in Britain, the Powan. The Powan is so rare it is endemic to only two lochs in Scotland, Loch Lomond and Loch Eck. Ruffe are believed to have been introduced into Loch Lomond as live baits by pike anglers in the early 1980s. As with all things underwater, it is difficult to get a full picture of the species composition and accurate population numbers, particularly in a body of water the size of Loch Lomond. However, excellent research from the University of Glasgow Field Station, also known as the Scottish Centre for Ecology and the Natural Environment, SEEN, on Loch Lomond, has been giving great indications and great data since 1957. Harry Slack, the founder of SEEN, reported Powan were the most numerous fish in Loch Lomond in 1957, and Brown and Scott reported them as very numerous as recently as 1994. However, acoustic monitoring of Powan by Winfield in 2005 and 2008 suggests a recent decline in Powan numbers. The main reason for this has been attributed to the introduction of Ruffe, which are much smaller than Powan. However, Colin Adams and colleagues demonstrated they feed voraciously on Powan eggs, which is a cause for concern for subsequent generations of Powan. An interesting consequence demonstrated by Colin Adams, Peter Maitland and Dominic McCafferty is a shift in diet of piscivorous animals such as northern pike, herons, cormorants and otters to feed predominantly on the new and abundant Ruffe population. Although this may sound positive, Adams and Maitland are hesitant to suggest this is a positive thing for the ecosystem as a whole. In fact, they state changes in the diets of piscivorous birds and northern pike would appear to amount to considerable predation relief for the native species that compromise the diet of fish predators before the arrival of Ruffe. However, given our lack of understanding of the mechanisms regulating populations, it is unclear what will be the response of the predator population. If prey availability is limiting predator population size, then predation pressure on native species could conceivably increase if the population expands. That's probably a good way to end this podcast and perhaps investigate the issues facing your local ecosystems for invasive non-native species. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please leave us some comments below, give us a like and a subscribe, and you can follow us on Twitter at inspiring_eco or myself at Dr. Martin Hughes. Visit our website, which is www.inspiringecology.com. And thank you for listening. We'll hopefully see you next time on the Inspiring Ecology Podcast.